Good morning, Year 11. It's Friday's lesson. Please could you write down the date and title and underline them in your homework books? Thank you. Right, let's move on. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to synthesize implicit and explicit information from 2 exam-length extracts, and you will summarize the differences between the views presented. When you see the pen and pause icons, please pause the video and write down the information. If I forget to put them on the screen, I'll always ask you to write something down if it's important. So in today's lesson, we're going to be reading about the differences between 2 prisons. Before we actually start reading our full-length extracts, I want to remind you of question 1. So on language paper 2, the first question is a true or false question, where you circle in, shade in the circles. And you have to decide which statements are true and which are false. This is testing your inference skills. So, to check you haven't forgotten this valuable skill, we're going to look at the first paragraph from one of your articles. And I need you to tell me, please, which of these 2 statements is true. The prisoners appear disorganised. This is a prison for cooks, cleaners and bakers only. Here is the opening paragraph, and here you have the 2 statements, which you need to decide which of them is true. If you require a reader in the exam, keep the video playing and I'll read it to you. If you'd like to read it on your own, please pause the video now. The next moment, a stream of some dozen or 2 prisoners poured from the cells, carrying their coats on their arms, and drew themselves up in 2 files, which means lines, across the centre corridor. Then we heard the warder cry, "Cleaners, face. Cooks, face. Bakers, face," which means face forward. Whereupon the men wheeled around with almost military precision and retired, which means left. Some to wash the entrance passages and offices, others to help in the kitchen, and others in the bakehouse. Please have a look at these statements again and decide which of these 2 statements is true. Please pause your video now to write down the correct statement. Now, if you're ready, let's reveal the answers. In fact, neither of these statements is true. They are both false. And you need to have used your inference skills to work that out. I told you in one of the first lessons, do not allow yourself to be tricked. So, the prisoners appear disorganised. Incorrect. There's a real sense of organisation. The prisoners work to a schedule, they come out and they line up. This is a prison for cooks, cleaners and bakers only. Incorrect. Although each person in the prison has a role to play, they are cooks, cleaners and bakers, each person might have had a different job outside of the prison. So do not allow yourself to be tricked by the statements they give you for question 1. Now we're going to begin by reading the 19th century non-fiction article. It's an account by a man called Henry Mayhew, who visits a prison. As you read, in your homework books, you're going to jot down some inferences for each paragraph. You need to try to use your own words and not words from the text. To understand what I mean, I'll show you on the next slide. So here we have the first paragraph. And these are my inferences, what I can gather from this paragraph, which I've just read to you for the true or false statement. So, it's crowded, which means busy, methodical, ordered, regimented like an army. They're very disciplined, well-behaved, and they are organised. You do not need to write down this many inferences, but perhaps try to write down 2 to 3 for each paragraph of the extract. You have the extract available to you on the Google Classroom, so you can open it up and look at it on your own computer. However, I'm also going to provide it for you on this screen. And for those of you who require a reader in the exam, I'm going to read the extracts to you. We're going to begin by reading both extracts, so it's vital you start to record some inferences in your homework book beneath the correct subtitle. So you need to write the subtitle Source A first, and then paragraph 1 in your margin. Because we're reading both extracts simultaneously, you need to be able to remember the key differences. So making these notes, these inferences, will help you when I ask you to make your squid table towards the end of the lesson. So let's start by reading our 19th century non-fiction article by Henry Mayhew. So I'm going to hold back, which is going to be a challenge, and not provide you with easy definitions of the harder words. We're going to treat this like it was an actual exam. Please remember, as I've told most of you before, if I've taught you, you will always be able to understand words or phrases, which means a sentence, within the 19th century extracts. Even if you have an extract for A Christmas Carol and you feel that you don't recall most of it, or you cannot understand the phrasing, there will always be information that you can understand. For example, the next moment, a stream of some dozen or two prisoners poured from the cells, carrying their coats on their arms, and drew themselves up in 2 files, I did help you with that word, for the starter activity, across the centre corridor. So from the word poured, you can infer that lots of them are coming out of the cells where they live. So if you pour something, it's often a great amount. They pour out. You can tell that they're very organised and disciplined because rather than rioting or misbehaving, they stand in 2 lines in the corridor without any fuss. So you can start to understand words if there are parts of the paragraph you do not necessarily comprehend. Just do not be put off by challenging words. Don't, for example, sit and think, what does asphalt mean? What on earth is earthstoning? What's a convict? Use clues in the text to understand parts that you do get and focus on what you do understand, not what you don't. Now, without any more delay, let's start reading you these extracts. I'm going to read them both together. You will need to pause if you're listening to me, or you can pause on your own to read it at your own pace without my voice. Either way, for each paragraph that you can see here, you need to write down 2 to 3 inferences. This will support you greatly, A, in the exam, and B, when we do our squid table activity once we've read them. Because reading them both now, you might confuse ideas, because you're not having a chance to have a rest between reading them both. Source A. The next moment, a stream of some dozen or 2 prisoners poured from the cells, carrying their coats on their arms, and drew themselves up in 2 files across the centre corridor. Then we heard the warder cry, "Cleaners, face! Cooks, face! Bakers, face!" Whereupon the men wheeled around with almost military precision and retired, some to wash the entrance passages and offices, others to help in the kitchen, and others in the bakehouse. By this time, 10 minutes past 6, the prison was alive and humming like a hive with the activity of its inmates. Some of the convicts, clad in their suits of mud-brown cloth, were out in the long corridors, sweeping the black asphalt pavement till it glistened again, as if polished with black lead. Others, in the narrow galleries above, were on their knees washing the flags of slate that now grew blue-black around them with the water. Others, again, in the centre corridor, were hearthstoning the steps and making them as white as slabs of biscuit china. And others too in their cells, cleaning the floors and furniture there. A warder stood watching the work on each of the little mid-air bridges that connect the opposite stories of every corridor, whilst other officers were distributed throughout the building so as to command the best points for observing the movements of the prisoners. We're now here. Our attendant led us to an elevated part of the building so that we might have a bird's eye view of the scene, and assuredly it was a strange sight to look down upon the long, arcade-like corridors that were now half fogged with the cloud of dust rising from the sweepers' brooms, and witness the bustle and life of that place, which on our entrance seemed as still as so many cloisters, while the commingling of the many different sounds, the rattling of pails, the banging of doors, the scouring of the stones, the rumbling of trucks, the tramping of feet up the metal stairs, all echoing through the long tunnels, added greatly to the peculiarity of the scene. The officer now drew our attention to the fact that the hands of the clock were pointing to the time he had mentioned, and that the men who had been at work along one side of the galleries had all finished and withdrawn. Then began the same succession of noises, like the clicking, as we have said, of so many musket triggers, indicating the unlocking of the opposite cells, and we could see, whence we stood, the officers hastening along the corridors, unfastening each door as they went, with greater rapidity than even lamp-lighters travel from lamp to lamp along a street, and immediately afterwards we beheld a fresh batch of cleaners come out into each gallery, and the sweepers below cross over and begin working under them, whilst the same noises resounded through the building as before. So that's our first extract read. What you might have gathered is it's very loud, but it's very organised, and the officers are watching the prisoners very closely to make sure that they're all behaving. Everybody seems to have a role to play, which kind of explains why it's almost military in the way it works. It's a very organised prison. Let's read the next article now. So just to remind you, both sources are about different prisons and the people in them. Use the details from both sources to write a summary of the differences. So we've read one source, and we're looking at the prisons and the people in them. So the place and how the people behave. Let's read our final source. This is from a 21st century extract, so language we're familiar with. Again, there might be some more challenging vocabulary in there, but do not worry about it. Focus on what you can and do understand, remembering there will always be sentences you can comprehend, understand. So this is written by someone called Alex Cavendish, and it's his account of prison life. As I walked along a concrete path within a very high fence topped of razor wire that was itself inside the massive grey and intimidating walls of an inner city Cat B, I had a curious feeling of being back home again. That's institutionalization in action. The only glimpse of the outside world from inside was the blue sky above, and it reminded me of the hundreds of days I'd spent within such confines, looking up above the high walls of other prisons that were very similar in layout and design. At each phase of the journey, deeper and deeper into the prison, gates and doors have to be opened by a member of staff. The spaces and rooms steadily get smaller and more enclosed as you enter each new section. Inside, it was all fluorescent lighting and all too familiar polished lino tile floors. You can smell the same brand of disinfectant masking the stench of unwashed men on every prison wing. On the notice boards, there were the same old posters about reporting bullying and warnings against smuggling contraband. Everywhere, CCTV cameras follow your every move, controlled from the security office. Home, sweet home. Fortunately, I was just making another social visit to a good friend who is back inside on recall. I knew that at the end of the afternoon I'd be going back out into the real world while he wouldn't. If any reader feels the urge to experience a tiny little bit of what it's like to be locked up in a UK prison without actually committing a crime or being the victim of a miscarriage of justice, then I'd recommend going on a prison visit if you ever get the chance. Believe me, when the first barred metal gate clangs shut and you realise that you are on the wrong side of it without any keys, you do start to get the sense of being caged and confined that prison is all about. So, ladies and gents, I've done that reading for you. As I read, I hope you were pausing and making inferences about each paragraph. If you haven't done that, you have an opportunity now. You have this PDF attached to the Google Classroom where you found this video. You can open it up and start to look through in your own time. Do not spend more than 10 minutes on both sources. So 5 minutes each if you still need to go back and add 1 or 2 words of inference next to each quotation. So, we've read both sources. You have them available to you for you to open up and look at in your own time. We need to reread the question. Both sources are about different prisons and the people in them. You have got to summarise the differences about the prisons and the people. So here I've laid out a table for you. It says the place, the prison, and the people. You need to, for the end of this lesson, create 2 squid paragraphs for each box. So you end up having 8. I've done that. In fact, no, that's not correct. You only need to do 1 more for the place, and you need to do 2 squids for the people, 2 in each box. Now, I've done the first one for you here, which is why you don't need to do too many. I'm going to read them to you, talk you through them, and then explain to you that I've also given you a head start with creating your own for the place. If you feel you do not need my intervention and help, you can pause the video now and look back and forth between the PDF and this document to start making your squid paragraphs. If you would like some help, continue to let the video to play. So squid, to remind you, stands for statement, which is a factual point, quotation, inference, where you explain your quotations, and the D stands for difference, where you use a connective. So talking about the place, the prison, in source A, I chose, the prison appears huge and quite intimidating. That's my factual statement. There are long tunnels and long corridors. So that's why it sounds quite huge and intimidating because it goes on forever. My inference is the prison sounds like a maze because of the long tunnels and corridors. Somewhere inescapable, you can't ever escape, and vast, which means enormous. However, at least they have space to move and walk. Ignore this incorrect word. So I've given you my inference about these quotations. Sounds like a maze, it's inescapable, vast, but they do have room to move. On the other hand, and then when you're writing this up in a full paragraph, you then look at the opposing source, the other source. So on the other hand, source B's prison seems small and claustrophobic. The rooms steadily get more and more enclosed. So it seems like they're closing in on you. The prison sounds airless and constricted, as though reminding the prisoners they are trapped and might not see freedom again. So I have my statement, my quote, my inference, my explanation of what this quote suggests to me. Now, to support you with making another one for the place, if you would like, you can use my statement and quote. In source A, the 19th century one, remember to go to the correct sources, the guards appear more in control because they are watching the work. You need to provide an inference if you'd like to use this, and a connective, so however, contrastingly. In this one, in source B, the guards appear relaxed and trusting. They are observing the movements of the prisoners. So observing sounds more informal, just watching as if from far afield, nothing too panicked. Whereas watching implies they're looking at them closely like an eagle or a hawk, as if they cannot be trusted. So I actually gave you some inference there that you could use for this quotation by accident. Hopefully you understand the task. You are finishing these or making your own about the place, your own squid paragraphs. Then you're going to look at how the people are presented. And again, you'll make your own squid paragraph. If you require some more support, I'll keep speaking. If you're ready to go this on your own, please pause the video and use a good 20 to 25 minutes completing this task. So, if you're still with me and want a little bit of support, remember you should have got some inferences about the people in Henry Mayhew's source. They lined up, they were quiet, they all went about their jobs, they were sweeping, they were dusting, they were cleaning. So these are very well-trained, disciplined people. So that could be your statement. The people are well-trained and disciplined. You need to find your own quotation and find your own inference where you explain your quote. Contrastingly, the people in source B, he said they do not behave. They have to have posters tacked to the wall reminding them about bullying and not to smuggle anything in, and they're unwashed. So for this one, you could say the prisoners do not behave well. They act as though prison is not a deterrent or punishment. So they're a bit more fearless. So if you want a short statement, you could say, in source B, the people or the prisoners are more fearless. And find yourself a quote, include your inference where you explain it, and then you can try to include a connective, if relevant, for when you go back to do your second one for this paragraph or this box. Please remember to send me a copy of your work by email. I'd really like to see how you get on. So you have 20 to 25 minutes to complete this task in your homework books. Please could you pause the video now? I've given you as much help as I can. It's over to you to be independent. Thank you. Right, ladies and gents, today's lesson is completed. So by the end of today, you should now be able to synthesize implicit and explicit information from 2 exam-length extracts and summarize the differences between the views presented. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend, get lots of recuperation and rest, and I'll see you for Monday's lesson. Bye, everybody.